Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for attending this evening. I've really been looking forward to this event. I want to thank Elizabeth and the Huguenot Society of South Carolina for inviting me to do this special presentation. I've had a lot of fun researching French Huguenot silversmith, and I'm excited to share with you what I have found. So my name is Kaminer Haislip, and I am a contemporary silversmith based here in Charleston. I'm originally from Aiken, South Carolina, where I grew up in my family's hardware and appliance business. That experience from being around tools and equipment and working with your hands from a young age inspired me to take the industrial tech class when I was in high school to learn to weld. There, I started making very early sculptures and jewelry pieces, and that motivated me to attend Winthrop University for my Bachelor of Fine Arts in Jewelry and Metals and my Master of Fine Arts in Silversmithing and Design. For both of my degrees, I studied under Alfred Ward, an internationally acclaimed English silversmith from London. When I graduated in 2005, I moved to Charleston and established my studio. Over the years, my business has grown, and I've exhibited my work both nationally and internationally, and it's been featured in over 60 publications. Since moving to Charleston, I've been inspired by historic Charleston silversmiths, such as Alexander Petrie, whose coffee pot is shown in the slide. On the left-hand side, you can see that is one of 4 known coffee pots by him that are still in existence. It was made in the 18th century here in Charleston. I have it paired with my silver and purple heartwood coffee pot that was honored with a Made in the South award by Garden & Gun magazine in 2012. As you can see, the two objects are similar, is somewhat in form. They have a handle and a spout, but they are entirely different in their aesthetic. My work is entirely contemporary in form, and I'm inspired by historic objects, but I like to put my own contemporary twist on them. In the 18th century, Charleston's economic success spurred a very vigorous luxury goods market, especially in silver. At the time of the American Revolution, Charleston was the wealthiest city in British North America due to its trade. Throughout colonial times, the silversmithing trade grew, and by the 1850s, there were 285 silversmiths working in South Carolina. Charleston always had the largest number due to its wealth and the population. Charleston's thriving economy was built on the agriculture of cotton, rice, and indigo, and they were traded internationally. If you look at the bottom left-hand image, that is an image of indigo vat remains from a plantation on Johns Island, South Carolina, from the 1700s. If you look closely, you can still see the blue dye staining the bricks from the processing that they did centuries ago. Due to the immense rice cultivation in Charleston, it became a diet staple, and the silver Charleston rice spoon was developed. Its design was derived from the English basting, stuffing, or gravy spoon, and it was 14 to 16 inches in length. Shown here is an 18th century example by Richard Pitts, which is now in the Charleston Museum's collection. The historic Charleston rice spoon has been an inspiration for my work, and here is my contemporary example of it. It too is 14 inches in length. In 2017, it was awarded a Daughters of the American Revolution American Heritage Award. Indigo was another prominent crop that inspired a special silver object. Shown here is an indigo plantation from the French West Indies and the vats where they would process the dye. A special silver cup, also in the drawing, was used to test the dye to see if the color was correct. It had a mirror finish on the bottom in order to see the color clearly. When indigo production ended, so too did the use of this cup, and no historic ones are known to exist. Any that exist today are likely disguised as a wine taster, which also has French origins. For a recent collaborative indigo and silver exhibition with textile artist Lee Magar, I created my own contemporary version of the indigo tester based on these drawings, as well as dimensions and images of historic wine tasters. The handle design was inspired by indigo leaves from Lee's plants. Beginning in the 1680s, the religious oppression of French Huguenot Protestants forced them to leave and take refuge in England and America. The jewelers and silversmiths brought with them the latest French styles and methods of silver production, which became popular with the wealthy patrons due to the lavish decorations on the silver. Pierre Harache, Huguenot from Rouen, France, immigrated to England in 1781. He was the first French Huguenot admitted to the Goldsmiths Company in London. Here you can see his rosewater ewer in the Queen Anne style that was made in London sometime between 1703 and 1704. It is now in the Portland, Oregon Art Museum. And the Portland, Oregon Art Museum has a very large collection of French Huguenot silver. So if you're interested in the topic, please visit their website. They have some really beautiful images on there.
The website.
Now, Charleston had quite a few French Huguenot silversmiths, and I'm going to highlight a few of those in this part of my lecture. Nicolas de Longuemare Sr. was born in the Forêt de Lyon in Normandy, France, and came to Charleston around 1685. He owned land in the Orange or French Quarter, the area's first French settlement, along the Cooper River, about 30 miles from Charleston. In about 1693, he moved to Charleston and was called a watchmaker. Pictured here, well, his son, Nicolas de Longuemare Jr., also came with him to America. And he was a watchmaker, but he built on his skills and became a goldsmith as well. So pictured here is Junior's accounting book from 1703 to 1711, in which he lists his watchmaking and silversmithing business activities. Depending on the nationality of the client, the description was in either French or English. It was later published in the Transactions of Huguenot Society of South Carolina. He also included in his book the silk goods sales of items such as caps and kerchiefs. The French community had established silk farms in the French Quarter, and where they would weave the silk threads into cloth to make items to sell. Samuel Gaillard Stoney wrote an article about him titled Huguenot Goldsmith and Silk Dealer in Colonial South Carolina, in which he highlights both trades. Unfortunately, I could not locate a piece of silver by either Senior or Junior, and I'm not certain that any are known to exist. But we do have this ledger, which provides a wealth of information. Moreau Sarrazin was the grandson of Jean Sarrazin, Sieur du Huguenot, who in 1678 was a deacon in Elie Prelot's congregation in Pons, France. After the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, their church was burned to the ground in 1686, and Prelot, Sarrazin, and a few others in the congregation escaped to England. They later immigrated to America and settled in Charleston. Elie Prelot was the first pastor of the French Huguenot Church in Charleston. Moreau Sarrazin was born in Charleston, but he went to Boston as a young man, where he learned the silversmithing trade. There, he also met his wife, and they married. By late 1731, he was back in Charleston and had established his silversmithing business. He was a member of the South Carolina Society, which was formed in 1737 by French businessmen and artisans and is still active today. He made this large silver Charleston rice spoon that is 16 inches in length and has engraved on the handle the South Carolina Society device of a hand planting a vine. It also has the motto Posteritatis, meaning posterity or future generations, engraved on it. This spoon was likely made around 1741 and is now in the Charleston Museum collection. Here's another example of a silver and wood toddy ladle made by Moreau Sarrazin in Charleston sometime between 1734 and 1761, and it is now in a private collection. Jonathan Sarrazin was the son of Moreau Sarrazin, and he learned the silversmithing trade from his father. He was also a jeweler, and he and his father were in business together. Additionally, he was a member of the South Carolina Society with his father. And this silver spoon that he made is now in the Calhoun County Museum's collection. Jonathan Sarrazin was not just a talented silversmith and jeweler, but he was also an engraver. In 1762 and 1778, he was hired to engrave copper plates and print currency. During the American Revolution, he was a member of the Sons of Liberty. In August of 1780, he was arrested by the British and imprisoned in the Old Exchange Building dungeon. There he was held until he was transferred to the prison ship in the harbor and then taken to St. Augustine, Florida, with some other notable South Carolina patriots. His sisters, Mary and Catherine, also resisted efforts by the British to force them to cook. They too were imprisoned at the Old Exchange Building for about 2 weeks until they were exiled from the city. Jonathan returned to Charleston after the British evacuation of December 1782. During the occupation, all of his inventory, goods, and tools were stolen. Many of his tools he had inherited from his father. He did not resume the silversmithing trade after that, but he was able to recover some of his real estate and became an elected official. I cannot talk about silversmithing, the American Revolution, and French Huguenots without mentioning Paul Revere. Paul Revere was not just a silversmith, but he was a copper manufacturer, engraver, dentist, and very active Freemason in Boston. His father, Paulus Rivois, was also a French Huguenot silversmith, and that is where he learned his trade from. Of course, their name was later anglicized to Paul Revere. He was a prolific and very successful silversmith, crafting a wide variety of objects, from complete tea sets to shoe buckles, harnesses to flatware, and engraved book plates and certificates, as well as did minor repairs. His surviving daybooks, kept between 1761 to 1797, now in the Massachusetts Historical Society collection, provide a very valuable window into the inner workings of an 18th century silversmithing business. This urn is recorded in his ledger, and it weighs 111 ounces. So it's pretty heavy. It is the earliest and the largest of the 3 known tea or coffee urns by him. This elegant teapot is in the neoclassical style, which was popular after the Revolution. It was made with silver sheet, and he made it with his rolling or flattening mill, which he acquired in 1785. At the time, it was a new technology, and it sped up the production of creating silver sheet. Previously, silversmiths would have to hammer out an ingot of silver into sheet, so it took a very long time and was very labor intensive. So I'm glad that we now have the rolling mill as well. The most famous of all objects he created was the Sons of Liberty Bowl. The Liberty Bowl honored 92 members of the Massachusetts House of Representatives who refused to rescind a letter sent throughout the colonies protesting the Townshend Acts of 1767, which taxed tea, paper, glass, and other commodities imported from England. This act of civil disobedience by the Glorious 92 was a major step leading to the American Revolution. The bowl was commissioned by 15 members of the Sons of Liberty, a secret revolutionary organization to which Revere belonged. Their names are engraved on the bowl, as are references to Englishman John Wilkes, whose writings inspired American patriots. On a personal note, my fifth great-grandfather, Captain Benjamin Page from Rhode Island, was captured with Paul Revere at Penobscot during the American Revolution. So I've always thought it's pretty cool that I have an ancestor who actually saw Paul Revere in person, even under those circumstances.
Love Scott.
So the Huguenot Society of South Carolina has some beautiful pieces of silver in their collection, and they have them on display for you all to see this evening. I want to thank Ella for photographing them so I can include them in my presentation. I had a lot of fun researching them, and I'm excited to share with you all what I found. This silver fork is engraved for William St. Julian Mazique, and the marks on the back include the stamp for Charleston retailer Greg Hayden and Company, and the New York silver manufacturers William Gale and Nathaniel Hayden, G&H stamp, along with 1849. Greg Hayden and Company were in partnership in Charleston from 1846 to 1852 and were located on the corner of King and Hazel Streets. They were silversmiths, jewelers, importers, and dealers of many goods other than silver and jewelry, including guns and home items. Their imports came from England and the Northeast, mainly New York, but also Boston and Philadelphia. New York silver manufacturers William Gale and Nathaniel Hayden operated from 1846 to 1850. Nathaniel Hayden was the brother of H. Sidney Hayden of Charleston's Greg Hayden and Company. So that most likely was that connection. It was common in the time in America for both the retailers and the makers to stamp the pieces. And that tradition does continue to this day. So it's always important to research all of the marks on a piece to make sure the correct people are attributed to it. This beautiful sterling silver christening cup was presented to Samuel Porcher by his godfather, the Reverend Christopher Gadsden, in 1858. It was made by Theodore Evans and Company of New York, and they operated from 1855 to 1865. The Reverend Christopher Gadsden most likely purchased this cup from Charleston firm Hayden and Wilden, which was a later firm of Greg Hayden and Company, who imported and retailed silver from Theodore Evans Company. Evans worked for William Gale before founding his own firm, and Gale supplied silver to Greg Hayden and Company of Charleston, such as the fork we just discussed. So likely that was their connection. This commemorative loving cup was presented to H. DeLacy Vincent from his co-workers at Vincent and Hayne for his retirement in 1905. This beautiful beast is a sterling silver cup with 3 hand-carved antler handles, which those handles make it a loving cup. It was made by Adelphi of New York, who operated from 1890 to 1915. And the bumblebee stamp on the bottom was how I identified the maker. We've talked quite a bit about silver objects, but not really the composition or the purity of silver. I predominantly work in sterling silver, and sterling silver is an alloy of silver and copper. Copper is added to silver to give it its strength. So when you see a sterling or a 925 stamp on an object, it means the same thing. And what it means is for every 1,000 grams of the material, 925 is silver and the other 75 is copper. So that makes up that sterling silver alloy. Coin silver is a different alloy. Coin silver pieces were literally made by silversmiths melting down coins. That occurred from really the pre-revolutionary era until about the 1870s. So for coin silver pieces, those are identified with different marks than sterling.
So you go back
And
and
that
forth
you will
between
see a
that and
coin,
her face.
pure dollar, a D for dollar.
It's also being recorded, it says. Look on photos, so, but it's, what happened, why'd she go away?
Why did she go away?
Oh. Okay. So silver marks on objects from the United Kingdom each tell you something specific about that item. The marks are struck into the office by an assay office, which tests the items for purity. Hallmarking traditions began in the United Kingdom in the 1300s, and those traditions still continue today. Here I have an example of stamps on a Hester Bateman piece from 1785. And from left to right, the marks are identified below. The first mark you have is the duty mark, and that was for taxes that were required to be paid on silver prior to 1890. But we know what year it was made by that lowercase k, which is the date letter mark. And what they do in England is for attributing dates to pieces, they start with a specific font, and they go through the entire alphabet, uppercase and lowercase letters. And once they've run out of letters to represent years, they choose a new font and start over. So it's a really good way to identify what year pieces were made. Then every piece of sterling from England will be stamped with the lion pheasant. And then you will have the assay office mark identifying which city the piece was produced in. The leopard's head represents London, Birmingham has an anchor, and so forth. And then finally, you'll have the maker's mark. And silversmiths and goldsmiths in England have to register their marks through the Goldsmiths Hall. So that mark is specific to them forever. No one else can ever have this style HB as Hester Bateman has. That is unique to her. So that's a really good way to identify who made something, especially a couple hundred years later. The majority of colonial Charleston silver that still exists today is church silver, because usually churches did not melt down their silver for money or to make it into the newest style. They were also pretty good at hiding it from looters during the Revolutionary and Civil Wars. Churches continued the tradition of commissioning silver objects for worship services. And here's a large silver communion tray I made for First Presbyterian Church in Aiken, South Carolina. The flagon and chalice, along with other items in the church's collection, served as my inspiration. These two items were hidden in a well during the Civil War, so this church did a good job too. I created these silver pieces for St. Thaddeus Episcopal Church, also in Aiken, and I studied their silver collection as well in order to draw inspiration and to make sure the contemporary would harmonize with the historic. In addition to church pieces, I've been commissioned by clients to create a wide variety of silver objects and jewelry pieces over the years. If you visit my website portfolio archive page, you can see many of the different designs that I've made. And besides silver, I also work in gold, and that includes yellow, white, and rose. In 2015, Southern lifestyle company Draper James contacted me to create a silver magnolia bowl based on their logo. Reese Witherspoon, the owner of the company, saw my work in Garden and Gun magazine, the silver coffee pot from the first slide. So that was how they found me for this unique project. The dress that I'm wearing in the photograph was part of their launch collection. So they sent me one to wear for their promotional shot. So that was a lot of fun, a little bit different than what I usually do. That was an interesting project. So in both the past and present, when a client comes to a silversmith to commission an object, we draw the design to figure out the size, shape, and amount of silver needed. Figuring out on paper the dimensions is really important because a small measurement can make a big difference in pricing. Here's an example of what an 18th century silversmithing workshop would look like. You can see the silversmiths are actively hammering away. Silversmithing is a very labor-intensive process. It also requires a lot of different skill sets. So I think this illustration represents that well, where you can see the silversmiths all at a lot of different workstations. One workstation I want to focus on in particular is the workbench that this silversmith is sitting at. You can see that underneath his workspace, he has a catch-all for collecting all the little scraps and filings that fall away as he works. My workbench is paired with his, and as you can see, it hasn't changed much over the centuries. I too have a tray underneath my workbench so I can collect all the filings and scraps too. Because in both the past and the present, silver has been a very valuable material. All of my pieces begin as sterling silver sheet or wire of varying thicknesses and dimensions. Each piece is handcrafted by my hand, and I do not use casting, molds, or other mass manufacturing techniques to make my work. So that makes each piece unique. Silversmithing is labor-intensive work, so we need heavy-duty tools to hammer the sheet silver over. You can see an example, again, of an 18th century silversmithing workshop. There they are using a lot of the same tools that you see pictured from my studio. The bottom right-hand image is a variety of steel stakes that I use for making bowls, spoons, vases, and other hollowware objects. The large medieval weapon-like stake that's in the foreground is used for tall vessels like the coffee pot in my first slide. Hammers are another tool that haven't changed much over the centuries, and silversmiths have quite a few hammers. The hammer we choose to use always depends on the object that we're trying to create or the curve we're trying to make. So for larger objects, we have larger hammers, and then for smaller objects like jewelry, more lightweight hammers. Here's another illustration of an 18th century silversmithing workshop. You can see they're hammering a tray and another vessel over a wooden stump and using one of those large steel stakes to hammer a silver vessel. I too use wooden stumps for hollowing and shaping the silver sheet. And here are the basic steps that I go through in order to transform a flat silver disc into a three-dimensional bowl. I use the stump, I use the stakes, and I also use an acetylene torch for my heat element. Now, when we choose a stake, it is based on the curve or the size of the object. I have a variety of spoon stakes, whether I'm making a little tiny baby spoon or one of the larger serving spoons, there's the rice spoon, then I use the stake that's appropriate to that curve and shape. So here I'm hammering one of my serving spoon bowls, and this is the final hammering process after the metal has been shaped, and I'm using a lightweight hammer to go around in concentric circles all over the surface to push out any of the irregularities, as well as to set the shape precisely to the curve of that stake. So that's how I achieve that really smooth curve on the inside of the bowls. And then the hammer marks have to be stripped out. So that's where the some of the labor aspect comes in. Now, after all of that hammering and fabricating, I've got to get it shiny. And the way I do that is with polishing machines. So the polishing machines have mops or buffs that have compound applied to them. What the compound does is it cuts the surface and burnishes it into that mirror finish. So it's messy, puts out a lot of dust in my little polishing room, and it gets pretty hot in there too. But to me, it's well worth it in order to achieve that beautiful lustrous shine. So even though the styles have changed, the function and use remains the same. Just as I said for my first slide, I'm inspired by historic objects. but I put my own contemporary twist and interpretation on them. So we may not entertain as formally as often as they did in the past, but we still socialize in many of the same ways and use a lot of the same items, such as serving pieces, utensils, and drinking vessels. I'm inspired by the smaller objects as well as the larger ones, such as wine coasters, decanter bottle tags, drinking cups, and wine cups. But as I said before, I like to put my own contemporary twist on them to update them for more modern entertaining. So in addition to the silver objects, I do create jewelry, and the necklace shown there, I'm actually wearing tonight. So if you want to see it in person, you can have a look after the talk. And my most recent jewelry designs were inspired by my 5th great-grandfather's service in the American Revolution. Each element on the necklace highlights an aspect of his military service, and it was awarded a DAR American Heritage Award in 2021. A small spin-off jewelry series I did from that necklace is based on the Georgette, which was worn by Revolutionary War officers around their neck to signify their rank, and it was derived from medieval armor. The Georgette was on the first South Carolina flag, and it is still on our flag today, commonly referred to as the crescent moon. Later, it was joined by the palmetto tree, which also has Revolutionary War symbolism and inspired another recent jewelry collection. Palmetto logs and sand were used by American patriots to build a fort on Sullivan's Island to protect Charleston in anticipation of a British attack. On June 28, 1776, the British military attacked the Patriot fort from the sea, but they were unsuccessful due to the cannonballs sinking into the spongy, fibrous palmetto logs and sand. The American victory that day over the British was a turning point in the war and led to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. My 2 5th great-grandfathers, Captain Joshua Hadley of the North Carolina Continental Line and Robert Martin of the South Carolina Militia, fought in the battle that day. In 1946, 170 years later, their great-great-great-grandchildren, my grandparents, James William Franklin and Theodosia Kaminer Martin, married. So I'm really glad the little Palmetto fort was able to repel the aggression of the British, because the outcome may not have been the same, and I may not be standing here with you all tonight. Lastly, the upper part of the tree where the V-shaped frond bases are left on the trunk, also known as boots or boot jacks, inspired the repetitive V-shaped design. The round element capping the ends of the earrings and the cuff bracelet references the cannonballs that sunk into the palmetto and sand fort walls. So if you would like to see more of my work, then please visit my website. I have an online shop where you can purchase things directly. I have my portfolio where you can see a variety of things I've created over the years. And I have a small silversmithing film series where I demonstrate how I make my silver bowls and spoons in that portfolio section of my website. And then if you'd like to see my work in person, then please visit Elena Fox Fine Art, located on Church Street, right next door to Goat Sheep Cow. They carry a selection of my functional home objects and jewelry. Thank you all for your attention tonight. This has been a lot of fun.